You're listening to Food Tech Talk, supply chain insights from farm to fork, a podcast discussing the latest trends and technology in the food and supplement industries, featuring conversations with regulatory experts, quality and safety champions, and thought leaders across the industry. I'm your host, Lydia Adams. Let's jump right in. Welcome to another episode of Food Tech Talk. Today, we're delighted to welcome Phoebe Lapine, a chef, freelance writer, culinary instructor, and the creative force behind the blog Feed Me Phoebe. She's the author of The Wellness Project, a book that chronicles her journey to manage an autoimmune disease through sustainable lifestyle changes. With a focus on healthy comfort food and gluten-free cooking, Phoebe has inspired many to embrace wellness without sacrificing the joy of eating. Her work combines her culinary expertise with a passion for holistic health, making her a unique voice in the wellness community. Welcome to the show, Phoebe.
Thanks for having me.
We're excited to talk to you today. And to start us off, I'd love it if you could share a little bit about your personal journey and how you transitioned from being a chef and culinary instructor to really becoming an advocate for healthy eating.
Ironically, my food trajectory and my health journey started at the exact same time, but it took a few years for them to dovetail and really combine and have an impact. But I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called Hashimoto's thyroiditis when I was 20. It's very common for women, especially in their 20s, to get this diagnosis. Although I think it is rare for people to just get it right off the back from their regular doctor. A lot of women bounce around between practitioners looking for answers and don't necessarily get the autoimmune diagnosis confirmed. So I was really lucky on the one hand. On the other hand, I was kind of young and naive and had just quit my corporate job in hopes of pursuing this full-time career in food. I just got my first cookbook deal and was about to go out on the road promoting that. And I was deeply jarred by being told that I need to be on medication for the rest of my life. So I just pretended like the conversation never happened and went on living my life. So that was kind of the time when I really wound my way down health mountain, as I say. And it wasn't that, I wasn't having any symptoms at the get-go. I think I just didn't really know what a thyroid was, what a thyroid did, the nature of autoimmune disease. And that part wasn't really explained to me in the doctor's office. So I kind of had to hit my rock bottom, which included just debilitating fatigue and the occupational hazard of having a stomach ache after every time I ate. My hair was falling out, my skin was a mess, which ultimately, the vanity side of things really spurred me to start investigating further and pursue a more holistic approach and point of view in terms of other practitioners. And the first thing I did was I removed gluten from my diet. And again, that was very scary. I had just published my cookbook and I could no longer eat 75% of the recipes in it. But it made a huge difference. And I really found myself kind of on a higher plateau as a result of that. But I think kind of the problem with Eastern versus Western medicine, holistic medicine versus your cut and dry, data-driven medicine, I kind of took a page out of the author Gretchen Rubin's book. Her book was literally called The Happiness Project. And I kind of designed a curriculum for myself that took a whole year and involved trying on a lot of different lifestyle changes for size. And it wasn't a perfectionist mission. I really wanted to see what was worth my time, money, and energy in hopes of kind of by the end of the year, not only improving my thyroid numbers, but really just getting a clear picture on what I needed to do going forward to feel well.
It must be interesting with your background as a chef to really be able to take that to the next level and combine that with health. How did that really help in this journey and as you were writing your book?
I came at the project with the idea that my philosophy is healthy hedonism, and that the hedonism part absolutely comes from the chef background and the love of food and frankly, like the love of life. So I kind of say my goal was to find where the Venn diagram of the things that nourish my body overlapped with the things that fed my spirit.
And we have a lot of dietitians as well that listen to this show. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what you've discovered with diet. And there's a lot of misconceptions about carbohydrates and how that affects your health. So if you could talk a little bit about that and your expertise there, I think that would be great.
The book that I just came out with is called Carbivore, and it was really inspired by the health experiences I've had. One of those was getting a diagnosis for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO. And that was actually the subject of my last book, SIBO Made Simple. So I felt like there was a lot of confusion once you started to wade into those waters about whether carbohydrates could help or hurt, and on even much more of a micro scale than necessarily the way we talk about carbs in popular diet culture, which is kind of conflating the word carb with starch. So pasta, potatoes, bread, and whatnot, when in fact, carbohydrates are a macronutrient that include all plant life on Earth. So if you were actually to go carb free or carbohydrate free, I personally think you would be exponentially expediting your own mortality. But no, there's a small contingent of carnivore based lifestyle folks who disagree. But I think that the data points in the direction of carbs being hugely important for our overall health, especially our gut health. However, those of us who have had acute gut health issues have had to kind of walk a different walk when it comes to carbs. And there's a diet called the low FODMAP diet that I experimented with. It tends to be something that is prescribed for IBS or SIBO. And it's an acronym that includes a lot of different specific types of carbohydrates. And there are things that are thought of as being super healthy. Again, all vegetables are carbs. So a lot of plant fibers like onion and garlic are two big triggers on the low FODMAP diet. And legumes are kind of another big category in the acronym. But then a lot of random vegetables here and there, a lot of like woody vegetables that you think of as having a lot of fiber. So like asparagus, artichokes, avocado even. All these things were kind of no-nos on the diet. And it really contradicted with a lot of general anti-inflammatory approaches, which is to, eat as diverse a diet as possible, because that's what's going to feed your large intestinal microbiome. And we know how important that is for mental health, for our immune systems, for so many different aspects of our health and modern life. And we know that diversity of that ecosystem is the biggest goal that we can seek out. And creating that diversity starts with diversity on the plate. So I have to say, the low FODMAP diet, I did it in a therapeutic application, which was 8 weeks. And then I slowly got off of it. But in my interactions with people, the more I talked about it, the more I wrote recipes for it, the more people I saw who had really taken it on as a lifestyle, as an ongoing thing. And the same was kind of true of people who had done keto and other like low starch, low quote unquote carb approaches. And as someone who, again, has the hedonism side, is a chef, prefers to be an omnivore. I've stayed gluten-free for the last 13 years since I gave it up back then. But other than that, I do try and, again, incorporate as many different types of plants, different types of foods on my plate as possible. And I just found just like a real consensus of confusion, both in kind of how diet culture has spurned or stoked the hatred towards carbs, and then also just in terms of people who had worked with dietitians or with practitioners who hadn't been given kind of a thorough roadmap on how to reintegrate carbs in a healthy way. I really want to dig into the role that carbs have played in our global diet for hundreds of years. There's a lot of things that have changed in terms of how they're produced, prepared, and more importantly, how we interact with them on our plate.
When I think about that role of a dietitian, nutritionist, trying to explain to clients that this is not the enemy, what advice would you give them? And especially coming from a context of maybe having an autoimmune disease, to tell their clients, to help them to understand that balance comes in different ways and carbs are not necessarily the enemy.
It comes down to your metabolic health and what carbs do to your blood sugar metabolism. It's totally possible to eat carbs and to not have them wreak as much havoc on your blood sugar. It's also possible to not eat carbs and still have blood sugar issues. It really boils down to the individual. And I hope it becomes a little bit more commonplace for people to have the tools, whether it be a continuous glucose monitor or what have you, to really see what their individual carb tolerance looks like. Anytime we use our muscles, that requires a lot of energy, and we need some glucose available for that. So that's just a good example of how, even if you're eating perfectly, quote unquote, if you are highly stressed about what you're eating or just living a highly stressed out life, you're already, again, like that plateau for tolerance of various foods is going to be not as optimal as someone who maybe ate more carbs and was really relaxed.
I want to dive in a little bit to your role as a culinary instructor. Tell me more about what that entails and how you help others.
For about a decade, I worked in New York as a private chef and taught private cooking classes in people's homes. I'd say my educational missions are more web-based these days through the recipes on my site and my latest cookbook, Carbivore.
And you mentioned in your books creating recipes and having the cookbooks. How do you really go through that process of deciding what would go into a recipe and beyond just, is this going to taste good? Is this going to go well? And then how that affects overall health and nutrients and nutrition?
I personally love crafting recipes for dietary constraints. I find it to be a real challenge as a chef, and I think of it as a chef and not necessarily the way some nutritionists who are trained to kind of think about macros or different nutrients as kind of a math problem. I come at it from the other angle of I want to create the most flavorful, the easiest, just the most nourishing weeknight meal that there is. So I think my point of view as a chef has always been to, leverage vegetables as much as possible to balance the macronutrients in a way that you don't have too much animal protein, you don't have too many carbs, hopefully as many vegetables as possible while still making it feel comforting. So that has always been the case, carried through to low FODMAP life. If your gut can handle them, I mean, seeds and nuts are just the perfect, I think, source of healthy fat, protein, and fiber all in one tiny package. And if you use the right seasonings and prepare them properly, they can just add such great texture to a dish. We see it again. You can just look to different global cuisines to see examples of some of these things in action. So there's like gamasio, this sesame seed salt mix that you see in Japanese cooking, za'atar, like so many different, each culture kind of has their own carb companions when you start to look at them a little closer. Even pesto.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And as you were talking about being gluten-free for over a decade, I think a lot of folks in and out of the food industry have food allergies. There's issues with labeling on products and all of that stuff. And so how have you navigated that as someone who is gluten-free and has these other dietary restrictions when you go out to eat, when you purchase something at the store? And what do you think is needed for us to be able to let people know what's in food?
There's so much greenwashing on packaging. That's, I feel, half the battle anyway. Unfortunately, the onus is always going to be on you, the customer, to kind of turn a package around and look at the ingredient list to see how many grams of sugar is in something, to see how many types of sugar is in something as it falls on the ingredient list. I mean, I think sugar is the big supervillain of the century. Unfortunately, carbs have co-opted that conversation and gotten lumped together with sugar. But truly, if you just focus on reducing added sugar as much as possible in packaged foods, you'd be doing yourself a huge service and free up more glucose points in your diet for pasta and bread. But in terms of, I think the gluten-free labeling has gotten a little bit better over the years. And certainly just the section of the grocery store has become a lot more robust. There are tons of options out there now. But again, there's kind of a pro and con to that. A lot of gluten-free products are pretty junky in their own way. You turn over the package and you see instead of 2 ingredients, you have 12, and there are a lot of stabilizers and whatnot. So I think it's just about striking the balance with those products and feeding your cravings, and then making sure that if you're someone who is just like sensitive to gluten, but not necessarily celiac, to kind of question yourself. And if I bought a sourdough bread from the farmer's market, a true sourdough, would that be a better choice than buying a gluten-free bread with 12 different ingredients from the supermarket? If I could tolerate the former, I would completely agree that's a healthier choice by and large. Thinking about how something is prepared, not just what's in it. We see, especially in pasta and bread, the way that we've industrialized the process has really changed the way that we digest those two things. So even if it's not realistic all the time, looking for more artisanal or small batch options, shopping local, farmers market, always a plus.
So, reflecting on your journey, and you've made several pivots in your career, what advice would you have for someone who's starting off as a chef or within the food industry and how they can find their fit in this industry?
Unfortunately, it's always going to boil down to your point of view, your experiences in life, what's meaningful to you in terms of taste memories. Like for me, it'll always tie back to childhood favorites. But my experience may be very different from someone who came to a culinary career having grown up in a family that didn't cook at all. There's there are different paths to the desire to get in the kitchen and cook. But I think it's true with any art form. You have to focus on not necessarily who you're pleasing. And that can be hard in a service industry where you have clients. I know I had a lot that shaped what I was cooking on a daily basis, but I think it always comes back to what's meaningful for you, what's delicious to you, what you love. That can really shape your culinary personality.
And then looking into the future, what are some new things coming up, innovations, technology, experiences that you're excited about in terms of food and nutrition and wellness?
I have been encouraged by what's happened with long COVID in terms of hope for the autoimmune population, finding more answers and getting more research dollars and being able to tackle a lot of diseases that are more alike than different, but don't necessarily have an aggregated donation pool in the same way that cancer does. And so I think I'm hopeful for the funding that's gone into long COVID. But yeah, I think it's an exciting area of research. And I'm just optimistic for the first time that there's going to be a lot of change on the horizon and a lot of development for anyone with autoimmune disease.
So lastly, how can people follow you? Where can they buy your books? How do we get more info?
Yes. So you can find me at my website, feedmephoebe.com. I have a ton of free resources, including a lot of recipes, a lot in the low FODMAP camp. Everything is gluten-free. And then I'm always doing new things on Instagram at Phoebe Lapine. And then if you're interested in Carbivore, you can find it wherever books are sold, but you can also go directly to carbivorecookbook.com. And there are links to all sorts of places.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Phoebe, for joining us. I really appreciate your time, and I know our listeners do too.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another bite-sized nugget of food tech talk, supply chain insights from farm to fork. To learn more about Trustwell and its technology platform that connects product formulation, nutrition analysis, and compliant labeling with traceability, recall readiness, and supply chain transparency, please visit www.trustwell.com. Thanks for listening.